One of the most spectacular animals on the planet alive today are the elephants. They look like nothing else on Earth, with their assortment of unique features, including their trunks, tusks, and sheer titanic size. Elephants are one of the most recognizable animals in the present era, but their relatives have been a staple part of mammalian fauna since shortly after the extinction of the dinosaurs. Tracking the evolution of the elephant is an interesting challenge, not because of the limited nature of its relationships like with other animal groups I've covered on this channel, but in fact the opposite. The order that the elephant is part of, Proboscidea, represents a vast network of different lineages of mammals that evolved and flourished at varying points in the Cenozoic. My goal with this video is to do my best to address as many of these lines as I can, while also painting a thorough picture of elephant evolution. Proboscidea is part of an order known as Afrotheria. I've covered this group in another video, but in short, it's a group of African mammals that first emerged during the Cretaceous, and saw its main groups evolve back when the continent was still isolated from the rest of the world. The earliest basal proboscidean known to the fossil record dates back 60 million years ago in the Paleocene of Morocco. This animal is known as Erytherium and was close to the ancestors of both elephants and sirenians. Being around the size of a rabbit at around 1 foot in height, this animal would have been a stark contrast to the giants of today. Fossil evidence of Erytherium is sparse, but what little does exist sheds light on its relationships to other mammals. Although its dentition still contains some primitive features such as canine teeth, it also contained other aspects closer to proboscideans. This includes an enlarged first incisor. This incisor would become the groundwork for tusks in the future. Additionally, the eyes of the animal were placed further up on the skull, similar to the orbital position of other proboscideans. Phosphatherium represented the next step in elephant evolution. First appearing 56 million years ago in the late Paleocene of Morocco, this dog-sized proboscidean showed more similarities to future members of the order, such as having cross-crested patterns on its molars. These teeth also showed scratches indicative of a varied diet of plants, some of which were likely aquatic as a result of this creature's more amphibious lifestyle. While Phosphatherium likely didn't possess a trunk, it did have a longer snout that, similar to Erytherium's incisors, would only grow in size through further evolution. Another similar semi-aquatic proboscidean could be found east of the prior animals in Eocene Egypt around 37 million years ago. This creature, known as Moeritherium, is known from extremely well-preserved complete skeletons found near the pyramids of Giza. Moeritherium is known to have had a round, barrel-shaped body as well as short legs, a body plan similar to those of hippos. This would have made walking on land awkward for the creature, but aided in aquatic locomotion. As for its elephantine features, Moeritherium's incisors formed short tusks, and it also had a longer snout that could have helped to grasp aquatic plants. It should be stated that there is debate as to whether or not these three animals, as well as other similar Paleocene and Eocene creatures like Salumia, were true proboscideans or simply more basal proboscideans. Some researchers even argue that the creatures could be Paleocene tethytheres that led to other lines of mammals such as Sirenians and the extinct Arsinoetheres. However, following Phosphatherium and Moeritherium, this order saw its first true radiation into two main branches. Of course, one of these branches led to the elephants we know today, but the other was a fascinating group that evolved in parallel to the first clade up until the early Pleistocene. These were the Plesioelephantiforms. The earliest group of the Plesioelephantiforms was Numidotheridae. Archanotherium and Dowatherium were among the first recorded Numidotheres, with the latter living in the Eocene of Morocco 53 million years ago. Not much is known about these animals, with fossils of them being restricted to teeth and jawbones. A much more well-understood Numidothere is Numidotherium, a proboscidean that lived in Algeria 51 million years ago during the late Eocene. This animal's incisors showed signs of further growth, and in addition its lower front teeth formed into a scoop shape that would have aided during feeding. It also had a taller and more elongated forehead, as well as stocky limbs, both features found in future proboscideans. It's interesting to note that the aquatic lifestyle present in animals such as Moeritherium and Phosphatherium was also present in Numidotheridae, and that this lifestyle evolved independently within this group. This could have been due to the fact that North Africa during this time was far more tropical than it was during the later Cenozoic, and the proximity of these animals to the ancient Tethys Ocean. Barytheridae was a group that evolved during the late Eocene and lasted up until the Oligocene. This family showed far more similarities to later proboscideans, with animals such as Barytherium and Omanotherium reaching much larger sizes and even showing strong traits of sexual dimorphism. Barytherium, literally named Heavy Beast in Greek, was one of the largest animals on Earth while it was alive, standing up to 2 meters at the shoulder and weighing 2 tons. This animal showed even more similarities to later proboscideans, such as having cross-crested molars, a long forehead, and even a trunk. This last feature has been a point of contention. Some state that it could be as short as the tapir's snout, and others argue that it could be far longer. Either way, it was clear that the proboscis of this group was probably far longer than that of its ancestors. Omannotherium shared much of its physicality with Barytherium, but it differed in that while the former is found in a similar North African locale to earlier Proboscideans, the latter lived in the Arabian Peninsula. Can you guess what country it is found in? Oh man, you figured it out.
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
This was the furthest west Proboscidea had gone yet, and with Eurasia beginning to connect to the African continent, the order saw even further western expansion. The late Oligocene brought with it one of the most unique looking of all Proboscideans. This latest family of the Plesioelephantiforms, Dinotheridae, saw an explosion in diversity when it came to body plans and habitat range. Dinotheridae can be further broken down into two subfamilies, Chilgatherinae and Dinotherinae. The first family has only one member, Chilgatherium. This animal, which can be found in the late Oligocene of Ethiopia, is similar to a lot of the creatures we've discussed so far in that it's only known from a few fragmentary teeth. However, these teeth show enough differences to warrant being separated from the other Dinotheres into its own grouping. At an estimated only 2 meters in height and 1.5 tons in weight, it was also far smaller than the other animals in this order. Dinotherinae consist of two genera of proboscideans, Prodinotherium and Dinotherium. The two are fairly similar in appearance, but Dinotherium is noticeable for being the larger of the pair. This animal clocked in at around 4 meters or 13 feet tall and could have weighed up to 12 tons. This would have made the creature both taller and larger than the African bush elephant. Dinotherium had a short skull that was a lot flatter than in other proboscideans. In addition, it also had the large nasal retraction indicative of a long trunk, but the real fascinating aspect of the animal's head was in its tusks. Unlike the elephants we're familiar with, Dinotherium didn't have any upper tusks. Rather, it had a pair of tusks coming from its lower jaw. These tusks extended downwards and could have been used for digging up roots and tubers, pulling out branches, or any other variety of reasons. From their origins in Africa, species of Prodinotherium could be found as far east as India and as far north as Austria. Meanwhile, Dinotherium could be found from Greece all the way up to Thailand. The Elephantiforms are the second main branch of the Proboscidean radiation that began during the Eocene. They first evolved a bit earlier than the Plesioelephantiforms, during the late Eocene. In addition, they showed far more diversity in the sheer number of genera and lasted farther into the future, with elephants being the modern representatives of this family. The first of the Elephantiforms is Paleomastodon. This animal evolved during the Eocene and could be found in both Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. This creature was 2.5 tons in weight and had a noticeable trunk evidenced by the clear nasal retraction on its skull. The animal also had 4 tusks, which, like many of its ancestors before it, could have been used like shovels to pull up aquatic vegetation as it lived a sort of semi-aquatic lifestyle. These tusks, alongside its long jaw and flattened forehead, were traits that some Elephantiforms would retain and even build upon as the Cenozoic progressed. Phiomia shared much in common with Paleomastodon, from its general morphology to its habitat range. Its lower tusks were arguably even more shovel or spade shaped than those of Paleomastodon, a feature that again would become even more prevalent in later proboscideans like Gomphotheres and Embelodons. Another Elephantiform, Erythrium, evolved during the late Oligocene and could be found in Eritrea. At only about 10 tons, it was several times smaller than the later Elephantiforms, but this genus was notable in having the horizontal tooth displacement that became a staple of animals such as elephants. Hemimastodon of the late Miocene saw the furthest western expansion of the Elephantiforms up to this point, being found as far from its African homeland as Pakistan. This expansion would only increase with the next most recent division within Proboscidea, the Elephantomorpha. The first branch of Elephantomorpha is composed of the family Mammutidae, or the mastodonts. These animals evolved at the time of Hemimastodon's extinction at the tail end of the Oligocene, 28 million years ago. The first of the mastodonts was Losodocodon of the late Oligocene of Kenya, which was followed shortly after by Eozygodon of the early Miocene Kenya and Uganda. The middle Miocene brought with it an extreme expansion in the range of mastodonts, more so than any other previously discussed group of proboscideans. There was Sino-Mammut, which, while only identified from a single mandible, made it as far east as China. Zygolophodon also evolved around the same time, yet while this genus first appeared in Africa 19 million years ago, within about a million years later it could be found as far east as India, China, and Kazakhstan, and as far west as Europe and even the United States. The most well-known of all mammutids were the mastodons of the genus Mammut, which first evolved during the early Pliocene. There were a few species of mastodons distributed all throughout North America. However, the most recognizable of all these species was the American mastodon, Mammut americanus. In addition, there was also the Pacific mastodon, Mammut pacificus, which was recently recognized as its own species. This particular animal lived in California up until the Pleistocene, and was differentiated from its western relative as it had 6 sacral vertebrae instead of 5 and a general absence of mandibular tusks. Mastodons bear striking similarities to more modern proboscideans like elephants and mammoths, to the point where you'd be forgiven for mistaking the mastodon for a mammoth, but there are a few key differences. For one, mastodons maintain a flatter, more horizontal body shape at the top. In addition, their cheek teeth are unlike those of their later relatives. While mammoths and elephants have flattened cheek teeth, the cheek teeth of mastodons are composed of several blunt cusps. Mastodons were typically restricted to forested areas, and despite this, they were far less common and widespread compared to mammoths, although there are reports that an American mastodon or a species very similar to it was found in China. In addition to distribution, their preference for forest meant that they were not as large as other proboscideans. They seemed to clock out at around 8 tons in weight and 9 feet in height, which is definitely not tiny by any means, but noticeably smaller than elephants and mammoths. Mastodons found themselves part of the larger megafaunal extinction during the end of the Pleistocene. However, unlike with other mammals where their extinction was most likely due to a variety of factors, it's fairly likely that humans were the main cause of their demise. The forest that they preferred actually expanded by this time, but they ended up coming into contact with humans that entered the continent and saw them as a good source of food. Unfortunately, this clash brought the end for this line, and they went extinct around 11,000 years ago. Ambelodons evolved during the Miocene, roughly 16 million years ago. Similar to Pheomia, this group had shovel-like lower teeth, but they turned it up to 11. Cerbelodon of the United States and Archaeobelodon of Egypt were among the first members of this family, and had large pairs of tusks in addition to their huge lower jaws. These upper tusks would disappear with future members of the group. Ambelodon and Platybelodon represented some of the most derived members of this group, as they had lost their upper tusks and grew even larger lower jaws. Abrasion marks found on these North American shovel tuskers found that they were used for scraping the bark off trees, showing that while prior proboscideans like Pheomia or Paleomastodon used their lower tusks for scooping up aquatic plant matter. That's a long sentence. The Ambelodontids likely fed on leaves, twigs, and bark. There's a bit of debate over the trunks of these later members. Some believe that they had a flap-like trunk that reached the ends of their lower jaws, whereas others believe them to have a more elephantine trunk. Ambelodontidae was a widespread group, but died out towards the end of the Miocene. The Ambelodontidae, or at least the North American genera, were likely part of the larger end-Miocene extinction that wiped out many animals such as the American rhinos and other ruminants related to pronghorns and giraffes. Corallophodontidae was another family of elephantiforms that first emerged in the Miocene and lasted from 7 to 7 million years ago. They were found throughout the Old World from Africa to Eurasia and were known for their long curved tusks. Recent discoveries posit them as basal to the Gomphotheres. Gomphotheridae was a widely distributed group of elephantiforms that lived from the Miocene to the Pleistocene, although some estimates put it as having originated as early as the late Oligocene. Gomphotherium was one of the earliest gomphotheres, having evolved in the Miocene and was found in Africa, North America, and Eurasia. This creature, similar to early Ambelodons, had 2 upper tusks in addition to 2 shovel-shaped lower tusks. In addition, it was known to have had a flattened skull. This general body plan was present in later gomphotheres, from Myomastodon of China to Nathbelodon and Eubelodon of the US. While they were very similar morphologically to the Ambelodons, they differed in that these tusks were used for feeding on aquatic vegetation instead of plants like leaves. This is due to the fact that the habitats of gomphotheres were primarily wetlands and marshes, contrasted with the more forested regions Ambelodons could be found in. The differences between the gomphotheres and Ambelodons would become even more pronounced with the later Brevirostrine gomphotheres, which saw a reduction or outright elimination in their lower tusks. Rather than looking like Ambelodons, the later genera of gomphotheres far more resembled mastodons, to the point where they were often confused with them. Beyond physical changes, these gomphotheres also began to move from the wetlands to many other types of habitats. Additionally, the gomphotheres were unique in being the only group of proboscideans to venture into South America, migrating from North America after the 2 continents joined at the end of the Pliocene. Some of these South American gomphotheres were Pleistocene genera such as Stegomastodon, Cuviornis, and Nodiomastodon. The makeup of the cheek teeth of these gomphotheres, such as Stegomastodons, which were covered in enamel and made up of several bumps and ridges, indicated that these animals were likely grazers. As a result, they likely competed with Pleistocene mammoth species in North America, which were also known to be grazers, to the point where they were driven south. The gomphotheres did well in the southern continent, however, and some of these animals, like Nodiomastodon, are reported to have survived up until the Holocene, where they went extinct, likely from a combination of human hunting as well as climate change. The next branch of Proboscidea was Elephantoidea, and at this point you'd be forgiven for thinking all of these animals were just elephants. This group was home to not only our modern-day elephants, but also the iconic mammoths as well as the enormous Paleoloxodon genera. Animals within this group saw a general shortening of their face and lower jaw, as well as developing large crests on the top of their skulls. These crests allowed for upper tusks to grow far larger than ever before. One family that is known for having truly massive tusks was Ananchidae. Ananchus, a genera that lived from the Miocene to the early Pleistocene, possessed tusks far longer than those of modern-day elephants at 4 meters long. These enormous upper tusks and small, if not non-existent lower tusks were the norm for this family, although genera such as Tetralophodon still had the ancestral lower tusks. Stegodontidae was an old-world proboscidean family that was very similar to Ananchidae in having enormous upper tusks like in the genus Stegodon. Stegotetrabellodontinae is another group within Elephantoidea that retained their lower tusks, but rather than them being near vestigial or heavily reduced in size, they were close to in size or even outright matched the length of their top 2 tusks. Stegotetrabelodon was an animal emblematic of this trait, with a pair of upper and lower tusks that were both around 2.5 meters in length. The placement of this group has been a mystery to many scientists. Some see them as part of Stegodontidae, whereas others see them as creatures that can be placed within the clade Elephantidae. Ananchidae, Stegodontidae, and Stegotetrabellodontinae thrived from the Miocene until the Pleistocene, but only one family of proboscideans managed to last all the way into the current era. These were the Elephantids. Elephantidae is the most recent family of Proboscidea, containing the elephants and mammoths. The first elephantid known to the fossil record is Primelephus of the late Miocene. Primelephus gave rise to multiple different lineages of elephants. The genus Loxodonta is one such lineage that split off during the Pliocene and gave rise to various species such as Loxodonta cucae, Loxodonta exopoda, and Loxodonta atlantica. Most relative to us, however, was Loxodonta africana, the African bush elephant, and Loxodonta cyclotis, the African forest elephant. Members of this genus, such as the African bush elephant, differ within Elephantini, the group that contains all of these animals, at least compared to Asian elephants, with traits such as their ears being far larger, both males and females possessing trunks, as well as being more accustomed to browsing rather than grazing. Paleoloxodon was another genera of elephants that evolved during the Pliocene and survived until the Holocene epoch. Also known as the straight-tusked elephant, this widespread genus also gave rise to Paleoloxodon pneumaticus, which some argue was the largest land mammal of all time. I've made a video on this species as well as other members of Paleoloxodon, so I suggest that you guys take a look to learn more about this genus. Mammuthus was another genera of proboscideans that evolved during the Pliocene, roughly 5 million years ago. When you think of prehistoric elephant relatives, this group is likely the one you have in mind. There were a few common characteristics among all mammoths. These included large, highly spiral tusks, much longer forelimbs than hindlimbs, as well as a generally robust body with a tall cranium and well-structured bone growth for muscle attachment. The earliest species of mammoth in the fossil record was the South African mammoth, Mammuthus subplanifrons, that evolved in the early Pliocene of South Africa and Malawi. This species already began showing some traits indicative of the genus, such as a longer femur than tibia and curved tusks. From their origins in Africa, mammoths began rapidly diversifying, spreading to all parts of the globe. After subplanifrons, Central Asia became the next hotbed of mammoth evolution. There was the southern mammoth, Mammuthus meridionalis, which evolved in Eurasia 2.5 million years ago, which would then give rise to the steppe mammoth shortly after. The steppe mammoth, Mammuthus trogontheri, evolved 2 million years ago and was found in the Siberian tundra. At 13 feet tall and weight estimates going between 11 and 14 tons, it is arguable that the steppe mammoth was the largest among all mammoths. The steppe mammoth was also known to have shared its environment with the woolly mammoth, Mammuthus primigenius. The woolly mammoth is the most recognizable of all Cenozoic creatures, and one of the most recognizable prehistoric animals that ever lived. This creature's range spanned from Europe to Canada to Alaska. At around 6 tons, this animal was surprisingly not as heavy as one would assume, even being dwarfed by the African elephant. However, this animal had a far more impressive woolly coat, which could be 2.5 feet long and was coated in oily gland secretions and helped keep them warm during the frigid ice age. Many imagine these coats as being brown in color, and while they were, they could also get quite light, with some mammoths even sporting blonde coats. There have been some extremely well-preserved specimens of the woolly mammoth, such as Lyuba. This baby mammoth is found in a Siberian mud bog. She was so well preserved that scientists could even find milk from her mother in her stomach. It was thought that the baby died from suffocation in the bog, choking from all the mud she kept swallowing. Okay, I'm not reading this is too depressing. The Columbian mammoth, Mammuthus columbi, was a species of mammoth that first appeared in the mid-Pleistocene 1.5 million years ago and lived until the Holocene 11,000 years ago. This species has recently been argued to be a result of hybridization of the steppe mammoth with an early branch of woolly mammoths. Unlike those mammoths, however, the Columbian mammoth occupied far warmer and more temperate regions, being found across North America and the United States, Mexico, Canada, Guatemala, among many other countries. It's also unlikely that because of the habitats the mammoth could be found in, this species probably didn't sport the shaggy coat of its relatives. Columbian mammoths were known to spend time grooming by rubbing themselves against large boulders. This practice would help remove harmful parasites from their skin. At 13 feet tall and 10 tons in weight, the Columbian mammoth was among the largest of all mammoths. At this size, fully grown adults didn't have to worry about the many predators on the American plains. However, young were susceptible from attacks from animals such as dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, or lions. Another danger for these animals were the tar pits that were common in the western United States. These animals would have been found trapped in these pits on numerous occasions, and predators looking for an easy meal would find themselves succumbing to the tar as well. The bright side is that this has resulted in some extremely well-preserved Columbian mammoth specimens on display at areas such as the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles. Almost all mammoths went extinct during the end of the last ice age, with the Columbian mammoth going extinct 11,000 years ago and the woolly mammoth going extinct a bit later on. Climate change and human hunting were purported as being the main reasons for their demise. Despite this, several species of dwarf mammoths managed to hold on well into the Holocene. These include the pygmy mammoth, Mammuthus exilis, which survived a bit longer than the Columbian mammoth it derived from. This animal lived in the California Channel Islands. More impressive was the dwarf woolly mammoth of the Russian Wrangel Islands, which survived until 1650 BC, about 4,000 years ago. For reference, that's about 1,000 years after the first pyramids were built in Egypt, meaning that mammoths survived well past the dawn of human civilization. The last proboscidean we'll discuss today is the Asian elephant. While there are various subspecies of this animal spread all throughout southern Asia, they're all grouped together within one species, Elephas maximus, whose genus first evolved in the Pliocene. Interestingly enough, this species is more closely related to mammoths than it is to its African cousins. It shares their domed forehead, smaller ears, and is a grazer just like they are. While we're lucky to have 3 different species of elephants alive with us today, they're by no means widespread. All 3 species of elephants are threatened. Both the African and Asian elephants are endangered, and the African forest elephant, recently separated into its own species, is critically endangered. The biggest threat to elephants worldwide is illegal poaching. Elephants are prized for their ivory tusks, which sell for incredibly high prices on the black market. Another problem for elephants is habitat loss, something that dramatically hurts forest and Asian elephants, which aren't known for surviving on the open plains. We can help in elephant conservation by supporting wildlife organizations dedicated to protecting them, and not supporting the sale of ivory. This includes not buying ivory products, of course, but also not supporting legislation that would make it easier for the trade of ivory to get into international markets. Elephants are among the most unique of all Earth's creatures, and it's important that our remaining species survive as long as possible. I, for one, would not want to live in a world without elephants. They are very cool, and the baby elephants are also very cute. Hey everybody, thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like, make sure to subscribe and comment and all that good stuff. Before I continue, I want to give a big shout out to ZW and Cavuramus09. They provided me with a lot of resources and information that really helped make this video possible. I want to apologize for how long this video took. I didn't anticipate it was going to take around 3 weeks at this point to complete, but it's done and that's all that matters. So in the future, I'm going to try and speed up the progress of my uploads. Maybe once a week is what I want to aim for. Once again, if you guys have video suggestions, always make sure to leave them in the comments. I always try to look at them and, try to formulate video ideas off of that. But again, big shout out to these 2 guys, ZW and Cavuramus09, and a big shout out to you guys for making these videos possible and giving me so much support. I really do appreciate it.